we've been dealing this the sermon series called The Road to Reality, and this is our last sermon on this sermon series. And we kind of dealt with a couple things on this sermon. And if you've been coming to every Sunday, you probably have by now kind of had a kind of feeling or idea where we're going. So every one of them need to have the road to reality. Like sometimes we think this way and sometimes we imagine that way. But when it comes to life being happening, we need to find the reality in every aspect of it. So we learn about, we the church people have a reality check on our lives. We need to do an inventory check to make sure that we're doing right things, the right time and right season. And the second sermon that we dealt with, redefining emotional factor, because your emotions play a major role for your reality. Sometimes you see something, you feel something that you think that's real, and then you discover later on that's not the real emotion. So we dealt with that, and then you can go online and watch that as well. And last week, and we dealt with detoxing our mind, because our mind is an incredible, powerful organ that God created, that if we don't periodically detox our mind, we're going to pick up all kinds of junk. And then, you cannot go in future with the old way of thinking. You want to, just kind of get rid of some of the stuff that we've been carrying on in our mind and detox that. That way we can see clearly with our consciousness. Today, we're going to bring all those three to come to a conclusion of this series called The Road to Reality. So why would we went through that. We the church people need to think differently. Why did we want to go redefine our emotional factor, and why did we detox our mind? It's because God wants us to have a declaration in our lives, and we are the people that declare some things with our lives. We're the people that are constantly declaring through your job, through your family, through your affairs. And so today we want to focus on declaration of dependence. Sometimes when you see the Declaration of Independence and you know what that really means, but today we're going to focus on taking all those three subject lines and start declaring the dependence on our lives. So recently I went to India. A great trip. I had a great time. I still have a little bit jet lag, so I might stumble here and there. Just follow me. But I was in a plane going to India, and I was in a second, kind of like by the window, kind of like a second section, third section. I'm not sure. That I fell asleep after I preached. I got on the plane. I was going, and I was just so tired. I was sleeping. So we were in the middle of our flight. I mean, can you imagine that when you're going over the ocean, it's like a couple hours, especially the flight that I took, it is like a 15 hours flight. And imagine you sit in the plane, 15 hours, it's a long flight. So I was sleeping, and all of a sudden I could hear the noise in the plane. Like people were throwing stuff, and people were yelling at each other, crossing. And I had my earphones, and I could hear, captain with the voice loaded with the painful, unbelief in his voice. Like he said, please do not get up from your chair. Put on your seatbelt and don't leave, and hold tight something. And I woke up from the sleep. I'm freaking out, and his stuff was going this way. And plane literally just a little bit took over this direction. Then, I saw magazines coming down and blankets or pillows coming down. So I grabbed myself and I looked around. I was off asleep. People were screaming and yelling at each other. It's like the women were going crazy, bananas, everybody. And then all of a sudden, I caught myself into this place. How many times do you say, I'm a believer, I believe in God, and God will be always with me. God is going to be with me. But in a situation like that, when something brutal happens to you, you're not going to immediately wake up in faith. You're just going to immediately start thinking negative things. I don't know about you. This is exactly what had happened to me. I woke up from that sleep, start thinking, okay, if this plane goes down, what do I do with my passport? I'm worried about my passport. And I woke up thinking, oh my God, this is going to go down. I mean, like, I literally believe the plane is going to go down. We're going to end up in the water. And I'm thinking, I'm going to lose my credit cards. I'm going to lose my ID. Where do I go to ID? And I'm thinking, okay, when I get on, how do I swim? Should I survive? Am I going to die? What if I die? Maybe, what about my wife? What is going to happen? All these thoughts took a hold of my soul. My soul began to, erupt with the incredible, hopelessness moment at that moment. And I just thinking, oh my God, this is over. I had to catch myself after a while. When you wake up from sleep, you're not really out there. Like, you're just half asleep and half thinking, half believe. I was like that. But whenever the trouble came, immediately I started declining into the trouble. And that's exactly happens to all of us, those that are here, those that are watching. We're not instantly, faith-given people. When the trouble comes, we're going to surrender to trouble. That's okay. That's the humanity nature, the nature of human. But when you pause in the middle of the situation, I had to do that. All of a sudden, I start thinking about myself. I said, wait a minute, I'm a pastor. Wait a minute, I believe in the Word of God. Wait a minute, I believe God. Wait a minute, what is this going on? And then when I woke up and I started depending on God. There's sometimes that there's certain things you can depend on people and you're able to get the results for that, right? The teachers, and depends on the, principal. The students depends on teachers, and you depend on some people. We depend on government. We depend on our employers. We're all depending on certain layers. But there's some things in your life, in my life, we're going to find out we cannot depend on people anymore. We have to depend on God. So at that night when I discovered that the captain of this plane cannot help me, the air hostess cannot help me, the people in this plane cannot help me, now I decided thinking, wait a minute, it's the only hope that I have is God. And I started praying. And I prayed so loud, I thought I prayed out of fear. I prayed because everybody freaking out. I mean, imagine that you're the only one like praying. And I'm praying. As I was praying, I fell asleep. And when I fell asleep, I think, we landed okay and everything was fine. That's why I'm still here talking to you. Praise Jesus. Let's just give the Lord a big hand clap for that miracle. That miracle. But I believed afterwards maybe God was checking on me to see if I'm depending on Him. And He checking on me to see if I'm really going to pray. But the initial movement, the initial response to the problem was given to the negative notion of the problem. Everybody will do that. When the problem comes to us, we're going to give in to the problem. But we have to eventually wake up from that and start thinking through it and start analyzing, evaluating, saying, no, wait a minute, I can't do this. I want to depend on God. Let me talk to you about what is the dependence of God. There's a word called surrender. And there's a word called dependence. You that are watching online, or maybe you're here that you don't believe depending on God or surrendering to God. Maybe you're not a churchgoer. But I want you to know there's areas where you're going to find, and I'm going to find, that we cannot resolve everything on this earth. You cannot resolve every single problem that's come to your way. There are some problems only God can resolve in our life. So when you start depending on Him, there's a hope that comes on us. Then you're not going to waste your life thinking, man, my life is all messy and nobody's going to help me. I'm just jacked up, messed up. At least there's a sense of hope comes to a man, woman who learn to depend on God. And there's a word called surrender. Surrender is that you are going to give everything you have to God and hoping God will lead you to the direction that where God is taking you. But the dependence is not surrender. Dependence is contrary to surrender. Dependence is, God, I'm going to do everything I know to do, then I'm going to depend on you. Dependence requires action. Surrender requires the words. Surrender requires a sign that just say, God, I'm just going to surrender to you. And you can say it and you can surrender to. But the dependence is not like that. Dependence, you have to do something with your life to depend on God. You have to take an action plan to depend on God. So today we're going to jump into this declaration of dependence. We're going to learn how to depend on God, not only one area of our life, but every area of your life. You have to learn to depend on Him. Sometimes it's not easy. Like for me, even though I'm a pastor of the church and I read the Word, I spend time with God, but when the trouble comes our way, we're immediately responding to trouble how the trouble wants us to respond. But the maturity that comes on your life when you pause and start analyzing, then you're going to respond differently. So I believe that dependence on God requires self-evaluated consciousness. In other words, that you got to know why I'm depending on God. You want to know how I'm depending on God. You want to know if I depend on God, what I should not do, what I should do. And that's the evaluation. You got to learn that. So when I was on the plane, I have no idea. I cannot get off the plane. I cannot depend on the pilot. I cannot depend on the plane itself, because plane is given into the winds and the waves. And I have to only depend on God, knowing that, Lord, whatever outcome comes out of this, I'm going to receive it. If you want me to go in the water, maybe it's going to go in the water. So I had to speak to that. I said, no. I'm not going to go in the water. I'm going to come alive. I'm going to go back to India and then go back to United States of America and do what I got to do. And I have to declare that. I have to literally declare and depend on Him. And God made a way for all of us, and as He did for me, He'll do it. But you have to literally evaluate your consciousness. There are areas where you're depending on people, which is nothing wrong with that. But you have to always learn that people can only help you so far. But you have to continuously learn to depend on God. David learned to depend on God. And also, Paul learned to depend on God. He did not just depend on people only, but he learned to depend on God. Because God should be high source for all of us. And I don't know why I'm backfeeding, but God should be high source for all of us. And then we're going to start working our way into our lives. Because when we start depending on Him, and there's an incredible joy, incredible hope, incredible future, incredible understanding that comes to you, and that's going to shape your life amazingly. And that's what we're going to be working on a few minutes. The scripture that tells us in book of Proverbs, the chapter 3 verse 5 and NLT translation says this way: trust in the Lord with all your heart, and watch what the writer says what not to do. He says, do not depend on your own understanding. How many of us are here and you depended on your own understanding and you failed? Including myself. I depended on my own understanding. I failed. There was a stories that I can tell all day to kind of prove you that how many times I failed just doing this. I depend on my understanding. Our understanding sometimes leads us the wrong direction. Sometimes we believe this way: if I get a better job, I think I'm going to have a good life. We think this way: if I get a better, good-looking woman, I think I'm going to have a peaceful life. If I have a better-looking man, I think I'm going to have a peaceful life. If I have a nice car, nice house, then things will go well. All these are our own understandings, and nothing wrong with that. You can believe and you can ask for it. But life is more than a beautiful woman having in your life. Life is more than having a handsome man in your life. Life is more than having a beautiful car or a house. Life is much more than that. Only God can reveal that to you. I know some of you are probably watching, you don't believe in God, you don't go to church, and you're not a church people, but you have found out in your life, you have accomplished everything and you had everything, yet you still feel lonely inside. You still feel, unloved inside. It's because we're depending on our own understanding. How many times when you depend on your own understanding, you're judging your own spouse according to your understanding. And that's the dangerous to us. Our understanding is not reliable understanding. Our understanding is mixed with the pollution. Our understanding has a lot of drawbacks to it. And that's why God says, do not depend on your understanding. He did not say, do not process your understanding, depend on your understanding. What that means is, you do not have to access the decision making only from the source of understanding. A lot of people, they just believe in themselves, they take an action, and they ignore everything else. But the wise counsel will take a self-understanding. Okay, this is what I'm thinking. I'm going to talk to somebody else and see what they're thinking. I'm going to talk to another couple to see what they're thinking. I'm going to talk to pastor to see what they're thinking. And you take all that counsel and then you take an action. That's what the wise person do. But unwise people just think through their own head, and they come up with the schemes, they come up with the ideas, they come up with the action plan that's completely destroying their lives, their marriages, their personal, confidence, and all that things happen. That's why God tells us in the book of Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 that I'm going to teach you this way, that I'm going to teach you that do not depend on your own understanding. Acknowledge your way all through God. Just trust on Him and depend on Him. The trust word is kind of depend. That in my marriage, I'm going to depend on God. In my finances, I'm going to depend on God. In my job, I'm going to depend on God. It is a lifestyle that you're going to depend on God, not surrender. Remember that surrender is a different thing than the dependence on God. There's one story from the old manuscripts that I want to bring it to your attention. The story actually speaks louder about the dependence on God. When you look at this story, I want you to start putting yourself into the story and see if you can find yourself in that story. As we're going to go through the scriptures and look at yourself and see, am I able to do what he did? Am I able to do what the person did? And when you start relating yourself with the person, the areas where you're lacking, God can speak to you today so that you can reassess that area and develop that area to start depending on God. There's a man named Solomon. Some of you, familiar with that character called Solomon. He's the son of David. David was a king, and God told David had an incredible desire. David thought, I want to build a, temple for God. It's a great idea to build a temple for God. But when David time came up to build a temple of God, and God told David, I don't want you to do this because your hands are involved in a lot of wars and battles. You shed a lot of blood. I don't want you to build a temple. Because you have the desire, I'm going to do it through your son. And it's an amazing thing what God does with our families. There's sometimes you believe something. Sometimes you dream something. I'm going to do something for God. And then you get worn out as you're getting older. Man, how come God is not doing with my life? But God sometimes carries on the project with your next generation. And that's exactly what he did in the life of David and Solomon. David could not build a temple, but God said Solomon will build a temple. And finally, Solomon started, he built a temple. Solomon was wisest man, a man filled with incredible favor, incredible wisdom. The man would stand up and say certain things, and people will be amazed the way he was communicating. He has an incredible understanding about the flowers, about the animal kingdom, the sea kingdom, and the birds kingdom, everything. And the man would say certain things, and the people will respond to the wisdom that Solomon used to carry an amazing way. And in fact, God used his wisdom to bring wealth around him from different continents at the time. So finally, he built a temple, right? And I want you to see, he's an influential man. He had so much to offer to the community. He's a leader for the entire nation. The nation is looking up to him. He's a man with the wisdom. He doesn't have to do anything because God has completely blessed him with the wealth, the gold, knowledge, silver, beautiful woman. He had everything he had to do, but God was testing him to see his dependence on God. And this is how Solomon started depending on God. If we look at it, so we can start learning from this. So 2 Chronicles chapter 6 verse 12 to 13, the entire chapter is loaded with God's amazing truth. And I don't have time to go over entire chapter. I'm going to extrapolate fewer verses to kind of for us to relate with this subject called dependence on God, or declaring the dependence on God. So Solomon, on that day, then Solomon stood before the altar. I want you to just picture with me as you're reading. Sometimes when you picture it, you start putting yourself into the story. And that's how I start, when I study the scriptures, I start picturing that myself. So Solomon actually stood in front of the altar, huge altar, and of the altar in front of the whole assembly. Can you imagine? At that time, the entire nation, almost thousands of people are surrounded. As far as they can see, you can see the people. And in front of them, he did something so amazing. He stood before the whole assembly of Israel, and watch what he did. This is the sign, and this is how the men and women of God who depend on God will do publicly. Sometimes we say this way, I want to be secret in public area so that, people do not need to know. But there are certain times, especially when God calls you to be a leader among certain group of people, you need to be a leader. You really need to show as a leader. So he did not show this to ungodly people. He was showing to his own people. He spread out his hands. Can you imagine? A man who has incredible wealth, man who has extraordinary wisdom, a man who is able to articulate in a way the whole nation will respond to him. The man has so much gold. When he walks up in there, his garments will radiate in a way that people will be amazed with the wisdom that the man is carrying and the crafting that the God blessed him. And that man stands before the people and he lifts his hand like this. Isn't it awesome? And I think this is a beginning sign of dependence on God. Whenever you lift your hands towards God like that, stretch towards God like that, and this is actually a sign of crucifixion. Like you literally giving to God, I am depending on you. My hands is symbolic of my hard work. My hands are symbolic of my income generator. My hands are symbolic of who I am, what I make. When I lift my hands this way, I am saying, God, I am depending on you. You know how many times we come to church when worship is going on, some people will put their hands in here, some people do this way, and some people will, some people will lift their hands. But I encourage you to do this. Like I encourage you to lift your hands and just show him, God, I'm going to depend on you. Today, on this Sunday, I'm going to depend on for my life. When you do that stuff like that, and your heart will be seasoned with incredible humility. Your heart will be seasoned with the knowledge that you cannot grasp anywhere else but in the consciousness of God. So he did something else on the day. Now he had made a bronze platform. He specifically told his team, he said, I want you to make me a bronze platform because he's not supposed to go into the temple. He's not supposed to be a priest. So he made a platform for him, and he said 5 cubits wide and 3 cubits high. That's like a 5 feet high, a platform, and had placed that in the center of the outer court, which is outside. And watch what he did. This is amazing what Solomon did. He stood on the platform. So he stood on top of the 5 feet platform, and then he knelt down before the whole assembly of Israel. Think about that. And this is the king of entire nation. It's like a President Barack Obama making himself a platform in front of the White House. And every day morning, he's just getting up and just kneeling down, at least once in his lifetime. Kneeling down before everybody. Especially on the day when they take the oath to be a president. Instead of taking oath on the Bible, imagine they're kneeling down and taking the oath. And that's exactly what's going on here. And these are the leaders. They shaped the entire continent of Israel. These are the leaders who brought incredible peace across the globe. These are the leaders, they set the tone, the patriarch. They set the tone to be a godly leadership. And the man knelt down before the whole assembly of Israel. My friend, that is amazing. Imagine every time when the Congress gathered together and they kneel down in front of all the cameras. Imagine when the Supreme Court comes together, when they kneel down. This is beautiful to see a leader kneels down. And man, you look at it, Solomon, and we think, man, he did it because he's a president. But you're a leader for your home. You're a leader for your company. You're a leader for your life. Have you ever kneeled down before your wife and kids and say, I'm going to lift my hands in front of them? You're not showing them like, this is how it should be. No. You're literally doing this to let them see that I'm the leader of this house and I'm going to set the protocol and I'm going to depend on God. The dependence on God starts on the knees. It doesn't start in our mind. But dependence on yourself starts on your mind. You start thinking, you start, mapping out, how I'm going to make money. You can start mapping out, who do I talk to? You start mapping up, what should I do? And all this is in your mind. But God says, trust in the Lord. Do not depend on your understanding. But if you want to depend on God, the way it's going to start, working that out for you starts with your knees. When you kneel down and when you say, God, for my marriage, for my children, for my finances, I'm going to depend on God. Imagine the blessing. I mean, he doesn't have to do it. At this time in his life, everything he had. He had wealth, he had a power, he had a wisdom, he had a servants, unbelievable servants. Yet, the humbleness of this man speaks volumes.
To watch or listen to the full sermon, please download our CJC Life app to your mobile device. Also go to CJCLife.com to find more information.
We exist for 4 reasons. Number 1, we exist so people will know God, find freedom, discover their purpose, express their life in godly way. And the second part of that vision is what we do as small groups. Right now we are in 11 weeks of small group semester. We call them a fall small group semesters, and we have close to 25 small groups and all kinds of small groups that we do. And please go to our website CJCLife.com/small groups. Look for the curriculum and look into it, and then please stop by during the week and connect with one of our small groups, and you will not going to forget the experience that you're going to have with the incredible team that we have. Thank you so much.